I'm just thinking about consciousness and the role of consciousness in the universe and as an evolving property, entity of some inhabitants of that universe. And I'm particularly trying to relate it to some of the thinking I've been doing about determinism and free will, but particularly determinism. And a kind of cognitive chauvinism, I think, we tend to display as humans who have this consciousness thing. And I guess I'm partly informed here by Professor Anton, your videos, Corey. One or two responses of that Yamikaiba123, I think that's the right name, made a response. Just saw a black rabbit. Gary in Mendham, one of your responses, I think, on your website. Maybe one or two other bits and pieces I've been looking at. Yeah, I mean, first off, consciousness as a feature of the universe. I mean, it's indisputable that consciousness exists, for sure. But the idea that I'm probably mischaracterising it completely here, Corey, but the idea that the universe, that the teleological end point of the universe is to produce consciousness, that just seems wrong to me, way off. And in a sense, it seems to lean on some versions, at least, of the Anthropic Principle. I'll just flesh out what that is, just in case I'm not getting it right in my head. The Anthropic Principle is an idea that was put out basically as a response to some creationist and intelligent design kind of informed arguments, which were talked about the fine-tuning of the universe. You know, some creationists say that, you know, because the universe is fantastically finely tuned, apparently, then there must be a God. You know, the conditions at the Big Bang, if that happened, were just right to produce subatomic particles, or with the precursors to subatomic particles. The conditions just after that were just right for those particles to form into some of the early atoms. The conditions were just right for those atoms to engage in certain kinds of reactions to form, I don't know, whatever happened next, plasma or stars or something like that. Again, the conditions are just right for those stars to explode and produce other kinds of atoms. Conditions are just right for a kind of cosmos to expand out of all this stuff and form stars, form planetary systems. And the conditions are just right for some of those planets to allow complex chemistry to take place that ultimately results in something we call life. Very, very complex set of conditions have to be mapped all the way through that in order to produce life. So if you're of the creationist bent, William Lane Craig bent, you would say, well, you know, that can't be just coincidence, they said. That can't be just coincidence. Somebody must have tweaked the dials at the beginning in order to get us up and running, you know what I mean? Since here we are, the end point, God's creation, and this is how he did it, you know. That's the idea of that fine-tuning. The Anthropic Principle says, no, actually, no, you're all wrong with that. Or at least some versions of it do. So you're all wrong with that. You're misunderstanding. You're reading it you're putting the cart before the horse. You're reading it from the wrong end. Instead of saying it's so weird that we're here, it's such a random possibility that we're here, it's such a minuscule chance of our being here, that the conditions must have been set up at the beginning. It's more to say that it's the fact that here we are, therefore the conditions are just right. An analogy would be something like dealing a deck of cards. You know, if you've got a deck of 52 cards and you deal them out, you know, you shuffle them first perhaps, and then just deal them out one after the other, you get a random sequence of 52 cards. Now the chances of you being able to predict what that sequence is in advance are, you know, vanishingly small, millions and millions to one. Probability practically zero of your being able to stipulate what order those cards will come out in. But if you look at it from the other end, you know, if you start with this deck of cards that you've dealt out and say, what were the chances of me dealing this? Well, obviously 100%, because there they are in your hand, you have dealt them. You know, after the fact, it's completely deterministic. It was always deterministic, and you know, and there's nothing fine-tuned about the first moments of your dealing, which resulted in that sequence of cards. That's how it came out. So if you look at it from the end point, it's inevitability. And that's the kind of the anthropic principle. Of course, the universe must have had those conditions, because here we are talking about it, you know. That's the point. If it had been any other way, we wouldn't be here, so it's completely arbitrary. I mean, there are some weird things about the anthropic principle, some versions of it, which do come out in a way which privileges consciousness and human intelligence in a way that I just find a bit, as I say, cognitively chauvinistic. There's one particular one called the final anthropic principle. I can't remember. Was it Barrow came up with that? I can't remember now. Final anthropic principle, which basically says that, you know, once self-reflexive consciousness comes into being, as it seems to have been with ourselves, then it will never go away. You know, it'll all approach some kind of Teilhard de Chardin kind of singularity omega point. No evidence for that at all, as far as I can understand, and I think it's appropriate that the final anthropic principle has the acronym FAP. It does sound like a lot of wank to me. Yeah, but the anthropic principle, I mean, the thing more about this chauvinism thing, and it's something I've talked about in a few videos, but not recently, is that, you know, consciousness is what we think is valuable. So of course we're going to think it's important, and it's just a kind of visiting again of the great chain of being that was so popular in medieval times. You know what I mean? Where everything leads to humans. Everything leads to humans. All the gods and the angels and the cherubim and the seraphim and all the animals and the earth. It's all leading to humans as the acme of all that, of creation. I mean, and this is I think a revisiting of that. You know, the universe, of course, must have come into being to create consciousness because we are the acme of creation. But there's no evidence for that at all. Alright, Phoebes. She's been eating a lot of grass. I think she's got a poorly tummy. Happy love. She tends to eat a lot of dead things too. Really, really old dead things. Come on, Pop. She's fine. Anyway, yeah, so there's no evidence for that at all, that consciousness is any kind of high point. It could disappear. It could drop out of existence completely in 1,000 years' time or tomorrow. And there's no reason to suppose that the universe won't carry on its merry way. Of course, the phenomenology of the universe will disappear, you know. If everyone was blind, there'd be no visual universe. But so what? You know, it doesn't mean to say the universe isn't somehow there. No one can see it. So the phenomenology will disappear, but there's no reason to assume that the universe would. Again, I think that's just a failure of imagination brought on by cognitive chauvinism. I think it's getting a bit windy, actually. Is it blowing up anyway? So yeah, I mean, it's equivalent. I think Dan Dennett says this. It's equivalent to just saying to an elephant, saying, well, you know, the universe must have been brought into being in order for an elephant's trunk, for our trunks to exist. You know, with the trunk universe, and if once the trunk has evolved, it will never unevolve, and in a billion years' time, the universe will be one big trunk, a great singular trunk at the end of time. You know, the final truncated principle, or something they would call it. But I've talked about it in terms of flight. You know, the wing being, you know, if you were a bird, then you would probably the wing was the ultimate high point of creation, and probably have a good argument Hellenistic consciousness. I'm reminded of Genpo Roshi. Genpo Roshi's I don't know what he is, a Buddhist mystic of some kind. But he talks about big mind, and we've got little mind, and then there's big mind. It's another one of those, I think, spurious elevations of consciousness as a universal principle kind of things. And big mind, you know. But there's no difference to saying big mind and to saying big wing, or big trunk, or big dog, you know, the universe, big dog, big bush, big photosynthesis. It's all the same, I think. I think what is inevitable, and what is the case, is that consciousness is here right now, particularly human consciousness, or the various components which make up human consciousness, because I don't think it's singular. I think it's divisible into a number of different components, some of which are shared by our cousins in the animal world, some of which are shared by plants, some of which are shared by other things. But that little constellation of attributes which we call human consciousness undoubtedly is part of a deterministic sequence of events that have been in place forever. It's a particular 2 or 3 cards towards the end of that pile of 52 cards that's coming out. You know, some of those cards have got brain written on, and some of those cards have got memory written on, and some of them have got sensation, and some of them have got various different bits, you know, self-reflexiveness written on. So sure enough, yeah, consciousness has been dealt at this point. But again, that doesn't mean it's any different to any other card. It doesn't mean it's the point. There's no winning, you know, it's not a winning hand. Just pulling out a few cards from that deck and saying this is the winning hand, it's not a winning hand. It's just part of the deck. And you know, and one day they'll all be dealt out, and that'll be the end of that, really. And I have no reason to assume that consciousness or trunks or flight or photosynthesis or cars or anything else will be thought of as anything particular in all of that. Sorry, just look at it, Phoebe. You see, I mean, I look at a dog like this, you know what I mean? Or any animal, really, or just other things sometimes. And I think, well, you know, what's that? What right do I have to say, you know, to claim any kind of special status? I mean, obviously, I value humans more than anything else because I'm a human myself. It's just, you know, but I accept my own chauvinism in that. But that's not reflective of any reality. Certainly not reflective of an evolutionary condition or of a physical condition or of a biological condition or any condition, really. It's just, as I say, just chauvinism, really. Oh, nice fence. Just put a new fence up here. Look at that new wood, look. So that's that, really, yeah. There's something else I was going to say, actually, on this topic. What was it? Consciousness, chauvinism. Oh yeah, just you know, there could be an argument, I guess, or people do sometimes make an argument a bit like this, that the unique thing about consciousness, which distinguishes it from things like wings, or photosynthesis, or cars, or any other kind of junk that the universe has thrown up at this particular moment, the one thing that distinguishes it is it's self-reflective. The universe has become conscious of itself, you know, that kind of language, which I find a bit repulsive, to be frank. But yeah, I mean, no, I don't buy that, really. You know, I mean, to me, it's like saying, you know, the universe has produced mirrors, or has produced reflective surfaces on the surface of lakes, and the fact that the universe has now produced this reflective surface means that the universe is reflected in the water of the lake or in the mirror, and so the purpose of the universe must have been to produce this reflective surface in which it can be reflected upon and reflect back on itself somehow. I mean, what else is consciousness doing other than doing things like that? You know, it's doing things like that. That's the kind of thing it's doing, it seems to me. And is as embedded within deterministic causal chains and the more complex and chaotic causal chains that are embedded within things like evolutionary processes. You know, it's not outside of the game, it's part of the game. And language too, you know, language is part of the game. And the fact that language can do things like the things I'm doing with it now, even that doesn't set it outside of that, you know. I'm flapping my gums. The flapping of big gums. I'm flapping my gums and producing these words, but you know, they're all part of the same thing, aren't they, really? You know what I mean? It's all part of the same stuff. I'm trying to avoid future tense languages, particularly the word should. Isn't that right, Phoebe? Phoebe through a fence. I'll just finish on Phoebe's too. I'm not sure if I envy Phoebe, but I do like, you know, I'm intrigued by her relationship to the universe. Isn't that right, Phoebe? Phoebe, come and say hello to YouTube. Say hello. No, she says, I'm not saying hello. I have not yet become part of the universe, being conscious of of itself, she says. I reject that hypothesis.